Good morning. We're learning as for Shalem Filan Chaya Basarach. We're on Daf Samach Vav Amud Beis, but in order to make it easier, we're really up to the two dots, about 12 lines down. But I believe that this Gemara is hard to understand without understanding the next Mishnah. Unfortunately, I don't think so. We're going to do things. We're going to do the first part of the Mishnah. Of the next Mishnah. Then we're going to go back and do this Gemara, and then we'll go back and redo the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says, "V'kulan ein metamen bebeis habliya." All of this is really a hemshech of the previous Mishnah, right? In the previous Mishnah, we had gone through and we had said that both the chatas ha'oif that you had done either the you had done it, chatas ha'oif is supposed to be on the bottom. So if you do everything right, then it's kosher. That's the first part, which didn't really say anything. But if you do kamaisa chatas, which we don't know exactly what that means, the Gemara said either it means you do the hatzah l'maylo or the malika. You do that. I'm sorry. You do kamaisa chatas, meaning the chatas is supposed to get a hazah and a mitzvah. So maybe it means you did a mitzvah instead of a you did a mitzvah instead of a instead of a hazah, or it means he did the malika, which a chatas is supposed to get one simon, or it's supposed to not be mavdil. It's supposed to either which you are mavdil. Then we said if you do it any one of these things, or if you did it l'shem oila, either one of those things is going to make the chatas ha'oif pasul. And the same thing with the oilas ha'oif. If you do either the maisa or the lishma, or I should say, a third thing is you do it in the wrong place, then that's going to passel it as a oila, and it's going to be a passel. Okay, that was the first. I've just so now we're continuing with that. V'kulan, our mission now is saying v'kulan, all these things that we said, the different ways of bringing these karbanis, either as kosher or as pasul, right? The mission included also the possibility of doing a chatas oif l'shem chatas and with ma'isa chatas and doing it lamato. That it said it's kosher. So v'kulan ein metamim bebeis habliya. All of these different options in the first Mishnah will make the animal that it's not going to be treated as nevela. We'll consider the malika, even though it's a pasul malika, that it's, for example, let's say you did a malika for a oilas, for chatas oif, but you did it like an oilas oif where you were mavdil, it's still going to make it that it's not treated as nevela, which of oif, when it becomes a nevela, is metama v'beis habliya. That's the first in the Mishnah. The Gemara doesn't really talk about that at all. That's a given. But this is the complicated part. In addition, they're going to have a din of me'ilah. All these cases are going to have me'ilah. Now, me'ilah is we're not going to get into the Baruch Hashem. We're not going to have to deal with the question that we usually come up with me'ilah by kachim, which is whether it applies to a live animal or not. So for our purpose, we're going to say as soon as you are mekadesh an animal, or mekadesh kachei kachim, it becomes liable to me. If you have any hana from it while it's kachei kachim, then you have to bring a asher me'ilas, and you have to pay an extra fifth. You do this b'sheigig. So that din will apply to all the cases of the first Mishnah, except for 1.5. Meaning, this is going to be the din. Now, I should say that a kodesh kadashim, kachay kachim, the din of me'ilah goes off of it. For example, if you bring a chatas or an asham, where the basar is allowed to be eaten by the kehanim, that basar, then once you do the avodah, and it becomes mutter to eat, and obviously there's no din of me'ilah if the kehanim are allowed to eat it. Kachim kalim are never get a din of me'ilah, except to the extent that the emurim, after you after the emurim become kosher to go on the mizbech, at that point there's a me'ilah on the emurim. But kachim kalim b'derech klal don't have. But in any case, what we're talking about here, we're talking about oila sa'if and chata sa'if. Those are both kachay kachim. So as soon as you makadish them, they become subject to me'ilah. So we're saying all of these cases, we have a kachay kachim that became pasul, or even the ones that are mutter, are going to be have a din me'ilah. Chutz, the Mishnah says, mechatas ha'oif she'asur lamata k'maisa chatas l'shem chatas. If he does a perfectly kosher chatas, so at that point, the basar of the chatas, right? That was the first case of the previous Mishnah. If you did it the proper way, it's a chatas, and then the basar of the oif becomes mutter to be eaten, and therefore it's not going to have a din of me'ilah. But then, like I said, there's 1.5 cases that are controversial. So, but there's a second case that is a machlokes. Good morning, Menachem. We're looking at the Mishnah of Daf Samach Vav, the first part of the Mishnah on Samach Vav Amud Beis, and we're going to, after we see this first part of the Mishnah, we're going to go back and look at the Gemara again. So that was one case that everyone agrees that there won't be me'ilah on a chatas ha'oif that you did properly. Then the Gemara says, oila sa'oif she'asur lamata k'maisa chatas l'shem chatas. But in addition, if someone did a oila sa'oif and he did it lamata, he did it on bottom, k'maisa chatas l'shem chatas. If he did it, he did it on the bottom. So oila sa'oif is supposed to be done on the top of the mizbech. So he did it in the place of the chatas, and kamaisa chatas. Additionally, he also did it kamaisa chatas, and l'shem chatas, and he did it having in mind the chatas. Rebbe Elazar, I'm a ma'ilim ba. Rebbe Elazar says, nevertheless, it's still going to have me'ilah because it remains an oila legabi the din me'ilah. Yeshua mein ma'ilim ba. Yeshua says no, there's no me'ilah. Yeshua says this is also an exception, as the Gemara will conclude, and the way Rashi says now, and this is the conclusion of the Gemara, that we say for this din of me'ilah, it's going to be treated as a chatas. It gets converted into a chatas legabi the din me'ilah. You've done everything, even though it says oifis are different than other karbanis, that legabi the din me'ilah you can convert them. So if you do, even though it was separated, he said I'm bringing this as a oilas oif, but since he did everything about it as a chatas, and when he brought it actually, the kohen had in mind that it should be a chatas. Legabi the din me'ilah, it's treated as a chatas, and a chatas does not have a din me'ilah after you do the avodah. It's as if you did a kosher avodas chatas, which makes it into an animal that's no longer subject to me'ilah. Let me just remind myself, do I have to? Yeah, okay. I think that's enough for us to continue, and then we'll continue with the rest of the Mishnah in a minute. So now we're going to go back to the 2 dots right above this. So again, this is the Gemara had first asked the Shani B'mai on the top of the Amud. That was talking about the first half of the first Mishnah. We talked about a chatas ha'oif that was done. We said first a chatas ha'oif that's done correctly is a chatas and it's kosher. But if you do kemaise oila, then we said that it's going to we said it's going to be a problem. If it doesn't kemaise oila, then it's going to be puzzle. And the question was, what does it mean he did a kemaise oila? What does it mean when we say that he did a chatas oif, that he did that he didn't do its ma'isa, didn't do the proper ma'isa? I'm still on the first part of the Mishnah. Kamaisa oila l'shem chatas. So the Gemara said, if you'd say that it's shani b'malika, that's not like Rabbi Elazar Shimon who says that he said it's even kosher if you're do the malika of a that if you do the malika of a oila on a chatas, and we don't want to make our Mishnah not like Rabbi Elazar Shimon. So he said, no, it doesn't have to be that. It could be talking about where the shinu is in the hazah, meaning that hazah of a chatas oif is supposed to be a hazah followed by a mitzvah, and he did a mitzvah. And then we wanted to say it's mistabra like that, but whatever, we'll leave that on the side. So we said, I'm sorry, we should really see that. So the Gemara said, l'chayr, it says also l'mayla kamasa kulam psula. Hafilu kamaisa chatos l'shem chatos. So what was the difference when he says he did it l'mayla, that it's going to not be considered a chatos anymore? So he said it can't be mi'ila, so it must be he made a hazah. So that l'chayr, that's a raya that the issue, what's being changed in the Mishnah, since we say legabe asa l'mayla, it's talking about hazah. When we say that he didn't do the ma'isa chatas, that's also talking about hazah. So Gemara says no, it could be hakadis of hakadis. Okay, now brings us finally back to where we were supposed to start this morning, 15 minutes ago. So Zak the Gemara, Oilas Eif, the Shani B'mai. We have the same question about the second part of the Mishnah like we had on the first question, part of the Mishnah. So what did he change in this Oilas Eif? Ilema the Shani B'malika. If you'll say that what he did differently is that he changed he did the malika of a chatas. He did the malika only one siman instead of doing two simanim. Tani Seifa. What about this next that Mishnah that we just saw? Kulan ein metamim b'beis habliya. All of like we explained the first part, which is not relevant to us. It says doesn't become tamei as an avela if you did one of these malikas psulas. Umayilim b'hen. And we say it also gets a din of mila. Nema, if we're going to say that he did that, one of the cases in the first part of the Mishnah that we're saying that it's going to have still a din meila is not going to be this first part of the Mishnah that we said that it applies this din of ein ma'ilim bahen. I'm sorry, uma'ilim bahen, that it has a din meila. Then we said that it's a machlokes between Rabbi Elazar. They both agree that if you do a chatas properly, that there's not going to be a din meila. But then they had the machlokes. If you do a oila with all of its attributes, those of a chatas, Rabbi Yeshua says it's not going to have a din mila. It's going to be a second case, and Rabbi Elazar said it doesn't. But l'chayra, we wanted to say that statement at the beginning of the Mishnah, there's a v'kulan ematam beis habliya umayelim bahen, that could be even like Rabbi Yeshua. But then, if we're saying that the case of oila sa'if that you did k'maisa chatas is that you did a malika of a chatas, then our Mishnah, the first part of the Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yeshua. The Rabbi Yeshua Amar ein ma'ilin. He says ein ma'ilin. That according to Rabbi Yeshua, said there's no me'ilah on that case of a oila that was done l'shem chatas. And if we're talking about when he did malikas chatas, Rabbi Yeshua would disagree with that. So Ella, so what? Right? Because that was the only thing he did wrong, because he changed the malika. But Rabbi Yeshua says as long as he did, which we said even the case we did everything like a chatas. It means he did the malika and he did asa ma'isa chatas and he did a l'shem chatas, and even so we say it's going to be mutter. In the Mishnah we say it's possible. In the first Mishnah we're saying possible, and over here we're saying that it's going to be ma'ilin, but it shouldn't be ma'ilin. Ve'ela Zakt Gemara ve'ela b'mitzvah. So it must be that what was it that he changed? He didn't change the malika, but rather he changed the mitzvah. That he didn't do the zrika of a oif. He did the zrika of a chatas, meaning he did he did hazah followed by mitzvah. And so he only did hazah, he didn't do mitzvah. Ema seifa. In that case, I'll ask you, what about the seifa? So you want to say that the case of Oilus Oif, in order to make it that it could even, that the next part of the Mishnah could even be going like Rabbi Yeshua. So we're talking about mitzvah, ema seifa, Oilus Oif, she'asa lamata, k'maisa chatas, v'im chatas, v'lezo oim ha'maylam ba, Rabbi Yeshua oim ha'in maylam ba, the shani b'mai. We said that in the discussion where Rabbi Elazar and Yeshua did argue, they said in the case that he did lamata k'maisa chatas l'shem chatas. What was that maisa chatas that it was talking about over there? So, and that Rabbi Yeshua said ein ma'elim ba. What was the shina? Ilema ben mitzvah over there. Ever was the shina mitzvah? Emadam Rabbi Yeshua the shani b'malika mitzvah miyamar. Rabbi Yeshua said that the only difference is when he was mashana by the malika. By the mitzvah, Rabbi Yeshua never said that you're going to have this nafkamina. Rabbi Yeshua would not agree that if you did the mitzvah of a chatas on a oila, it has to be from the beginning. It has to be, you made a change when you did the malika. Right away, it becomes changed into a chatas. But Hazar, Rabbi Yeshua never said that. So Rabbi Yeshua over here is talking about where you did a nafkamina in the malika. So then, what is the result of all this, right? Reisha v'seifa b'malika. So it will come out that the first case, the chatas ha'oif of the first part of the Mishnah, like we said on the top of the Amud, is talking about malika, where the k'sha'asa maisa oila was talking about where he did the maisa malika of the oila. U'mitziyasa, and then this second case, what we're in now, oila ha'oif, we've just come to the conclusion, has to be talking about mitzvah in order that the first part of this next Mishnah, v'kula nei metamen, could even be like Rabbi Yeshua. And the Seifa b'malika, and then we're going back and we're saying when Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua actually argue, they're arguing about where they made a change in malika, because that's where Rabbi Yeshua argues. He says if obviously he would agree that if you started it with malika being the proper malika for a oila, that it would not change into a chatas. Reisha v'seiv malika m'tziyasa m'tzika. So go in Reisha v'seiv malika m'tziyasa b'mitzvah. That's what we have to say. There's no choice. Okay, I know this was a little complicated. Believe it or not, the next blot, not immediately, but after it's going to be even more, but it's a separate thing. Okay. So now we're going to continue our Mishnah, right? So let's review again what we said in the Mishnah. We said in the Mishnah that all of the cases that are discussed in the previous Mishnah, Oilus Ha'oif, Chatas Ha'oif, and Oilus Ha'oif, that were done with these various changes that we've talked about, that it was done, an Chatas Ha'oif that was done with a Kemaisa Oila, or l'shem oila, or it was done le'maila instead of lamata. All of these things is going to make it that it's still going to have the din mi'ila. If you do a pasala hakrava, it still has a din mi'ila. The only exception will be the very first case of the Mishnah before. We said a chatas that was brought properly. A chatas is unique amongst a chatas oif by kachay kachim. Is the only thing that after you bring it, it's allowed to be eaten, so there's no meal on it. But the oila, even if you do the oila properly, that's gonna still have a din mi'ila because it has to be burnt. It's not excess. It's not a mutter fahana. And certainly the ones that are puzzle are also going to be shaykh to mi'ila. They never got excused from their original mi'ila, their kodesh lashem that they had when they were hukdash by the owners, and therefore they remain aser b'mi'ila. Then we said the machlokes, however, there is one case that they argue about in the Mishnah, that Rabbi Yeshua says that if you had an oilus ha'oif that you did, as he says, lemata. You're doing it in the place of a chatas. Kamaisa chatas. You're doing kamaisa chatas, like we just said. Um, it's talking about he did the malika, the way of he did the first avoda l'shem as a chatas, and he did it also l'shem chatas. When he did it, he intended to be a chatas. Rabbi Yeshua will say in that case it gets converted into a oif, oila. So that is
into a
it gets. I'm sorry, from an oila into a chatas.
chatas.
Right, correct. So now that is the correct understanding of the first part of the Mishnah, and now the Mishnah is going to go, and the Gemara as well is going to go into a diversion of where Rebbe Lazar has a incorrect understanding of what Rabbi Yeshua is saying. We had understood Rabbi Yeshua as saying that the reason is because it gets converted into, so to speak, to a certain extent, it gets converted into a chatas, and therefore it is no me'ilah. Rebbe Lazar understood it that because he says that what makes a animal, what makes a kachim have a din me'ilah is the das, is the lishma to do it for that thing. But if you have a lishma for something else, then that makes it that the din of me'ilah goes away. If you have a l'shem chatas, that takes away a different lishma, that takes it away the original me'ilah. Whatever that means, it's a very hard concept to understand. It's hard to understand why Rabbi Eliezer exactly thought this, but they're going to go back and forth about this for the next amud and a half. So, based on that understanding, Amar Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Eliezer asked the following question to Rabbi Yeshua: Umam chatas she'ein moyelim ba lishma. If a chatas, which if you do it properly, you do it lishma as a chatas, it's not going to have a din me'ilah, right? Because the bus is going to become mutter b'achila. Kishashina shma, when you do it improperly, you have a machshavas oila, for example, moyelim ba. At that point, it becomes a chatas psula. A chatas psula, you're not allowed to eat the basar, so it becomes subject to me'ilah. Oila shemoyelim ba lishma. A oila that if you do it properly, it remains aser b'me'ilah, because you're still not allowed to eat the basar of the oif. Kishashina shma in adin she'emalu ba. Certainly, it should have me'ilah if you are mashana, it's shame to have it as a chatas. Because that was, like we said, that was Rebbe Eliezer's understanding of Yeshua, is that it's the shini shame that he understands Rabbi Yeshua to be saying that the shini shame of chatas is what takes it out from being having the din me'ilah. So he's asking a kal v'chaimer, if by chatas you're mashana shma, which it normally would not have a din me'ilah, becomes subject to me'ilah. How could you say that the shini shame of an oila takes to a chatas, changes it to not have a din lishma? Amalei Rabbi Yeshua says, "Layim amata b'chatas." Your kal v'chaimer is not a valid kal v'chaimer. Layim amata. This is like one of the most lumdish mishnayos I've ever seen. It's very, it's like almost like a taisis. Amalei Rabbi Yeshua. This is what I always say, by the way, that the Gemara is really just reapplying Mishnayos' way of looking at things, and the Rishayim are also just reapplying the way the Gemara looks at things. So it's perfectly, it's not so often, but this is really the way you're supposed to analyze. So Amalei Rabbi Yeshua answered back to him, when he's Meshana Shem L'Shem Oila, it's understandable that it no longer is, it's no longer going to have a din of that. It doesn't have Me'ilah. When someone has a chatas and he has in mind to bring it, even though it wouldn't have Me'ilah under the normal circumstances of a chatas, but when he has Meshana Shem Lo an Oila, the thing that he's Meshana Shem to does have a din Me'ilah. So that's why the Shina Shem will also make it subject to Mila. He used Mashana Shem to Chatas, which a Chatas would not have Mila. So that's the reason why Rabbi Yeshua says that's the reason why your Kal V'Chaimer is not a good Kal V'Chaimer. Now, I just want to reiterate, this is not really Rabbi Yeshua's svara. He's just talking in Rabbi Eliezer's terms. For some reason, a very, very strange thing why he's doing this, because he has really a different explanation. It doesn't have anything to do with the Shinu Shem. It has to do with the fact that he says it becomes mamish to an extent the chatas. It's not bedafka the Shinu Shem. But he's saying your svara, your kal v'chaimer that you're asking is not a good kal v'chaimer. Your whole svara, even in your mistaken understanding, is incorrect. So, but Rabbi Eliezer does not give up. Amal Rabbi Eliezer, but I'll ask a different question. And the understanding behind this question is, and this the Gemara will talk about specifically a little bit later, is that the only case where we have this concept that we seem to understand Rabbi Yeshua only says this din, that something that's subject to Me'ilah by having it can be converted. That's the only case. It's a oilas ha'oif. It only applies to a oilas ha'oif that you had a shem chatas, but it doesn't apply in any other case that it's going to be converted, even if it's with seemingly similar circumstances. And like we explained before, the real reason behind that is because you only can have a conversion of a oif. No other animal or a mincha, anything like that, none of that can be converted. Oifis are a little more, their process of becoming Makudish is a little more flexible. You don't have to designate them. They're, as we're going to see in the next Amud, there's such a thing as designating an oif without saying for sure that it's an oil chatas. You just being makdish it as an oif. So it's more convertible. But in any case, Amal Rebbe Lazav, Hari Kache Kachim, Sheshachtum Bedarim, Kache Kachim, that you shachted in the wrong place. Kache Kachim was supposed to be Shachab B'tzaf, and he did it in the wrong place. V'shachtum L'shem Kachim Kalam. And in addition, he had in mind that it should be L'shem Kachim Kalam. Yechichu, that should prove it. Shechein Shina Shmam L'dava She'en Ba'mila. He changed it to Kachim Kalam. Kachim Kalam do not have Me'ilah until they only have on the Emurim after you finish the Avodah, but the behemoths themselves do not have a din milah. And even though no one suggested that kache kachim, depending on what machshava you have, that's going to now become out of milah. It still has this original din milah. Doing it wrong doesn't make things any better as far as the din milah. Why are you trying to say that the oil size that you do l'shem chatas that it shouldn't have it in milah? Amalei Bishua says your example is not a good example. When you're talking about kachim kachim that you shechted in the wrong place and you shechted it l'shem kachim kalam, that you've not just changed it to something that doesn't have a din milah, because parts of it do have a din milah, right? After you, by the kachei column, after you finish the avodas hadam, at that point it's going to bifurcate, and the emurim are going to now have a din milah. They're going to become kodesh l'Hashem, and just the basar is going to be mutar b'achila. But when you're changing it to a chatas oif, there's no emurim of a chatas oif. The entire basar becomes mutter. So maybe that's in that case it loses its din mi'ilo, because there's not going to be any mi'ilo once it becomes fully a chatas. So now the Gemara basically continues on the same vein that basically Rebbe Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua continue the machlokes in a brisa, even though the setup here is very unusual. Tanya, Amal Rebbe Elazar Rabbi Yeshua. Just if you wouldn't have the little gimel mem, the bold faced gimel mem, you'd think this is like a continuation of the mission. Rebbe Elazar continued asking Rebbe Elazar to Rabbi Yeshua. This is in a brisa. Asham sheshachtoi betzafan l'shem shlamim yechichu. I'll ask you from the case of an asham that you brought the proper place. So asham is kache kachim, so it's brought in the tzafon, and you did it in the proper place, but you did it l'shem shlomim. So I'll prove that in that your rule that you said by a oilas oif that it did l'shem chatas, that it's going to be still have a din, that it's not going to have a din mila, it's going to lose its din mila. Why wouldn't that be the case by asham sheshachtu b'tzafon l'shem shlomim sheshina shmoi u'mo'elam by, and there's still mila. No one suggested that it changes, that there's such a din by an asham that it could change to lose the din mila. V'avata al tatama ala oila shavi sheshina shmoi v'shimalaба. So why by an oil is any different? Amalei Rabbi Yeshua lo yamamata b'asham shemshina shmoi l'shina esmekaymai. You're talking about a case where he did it b'tzafon. He did it in the proper place. Time ba'oila sheshina shma v'shina esmekayma. We're talking about Rabbi Yeshua said his din. You had to have all the attributes without a chatas. It wasn't just that he was meshana the lishma l'shem chatas, but he also did it, like even though it's an oila sa'if, he did it on the bottom. He did it lamata like a chatas. So what kind of question is this from Hashem? I'm not sure why he couldn't have jumped to this, just like we said in the Mishnah, but I guess this brisa worked its way up. So, okay, so I'll tell you the case of Asham Shachtu B'Darim. It's not going to make any difference. It's still not going to have, it's still going to retain its din mila. Even if you did it in the wrong place, L'Shem Shlomim. Sheshina Shemoi, Veshina Esmekayim, Yomoyelim Bay. It's still going to have the same din mila. Avat al Tatam al Oil, Javi Sheshina Shemoi, Veshina Esmekayim, Yomoyelim Bay. Amalei Rabbi Yeshua, so Rabbi Yeshua said back, Lo Yamata Ba'asham Shina Shemoi, Veshina Esmekayim, V'Leshina Esmaisov. Well, it's true that the asham is the second case where you said that he did it in the proper place. So in that place, it parallels our example, the din of Rabbi Yeshua, that it has in the proper place for an asham. And I'm sorry, he did it the improper place for an asham, and he had the improper machshava, but the ma'isa he still did like a shlomim. He didn't do anything. The act he didn't do it any differently than the original asham, even though he did everything else like a shlomim. The act he did like an asham. So maybe Rabbi Yeshua would say, I only said my din where all three of the attributes were changed. Amarava, okay, so good. I'll take your bait. So we don't really have a shinui maisa, right? We don't have the malika. But before we talked about the malika and the mitzvah as being differences between Eilah Saif and Chata Saif. Between a Asham and a Shlomim, we don't have those nafkaminas for a Shinei Maisa. But where the Gemara is assuming that having a Machshava Shinei Bailim would be a third attribute that could be the same, where he could have a third thing that he's doing differently than a Asham, like a Shlomim, that would be the same as if he was Mashana Maisa. But you're treating Shinei Bailim as a replacement Shinei Maisa. So that's the Gemara says, Shishines Shmoi, Veshines Mekayim, Veshines Maisav. Well, let me look at this Shita Mekubetz's Ches, because he Shina Es Maisav Umayalimba. Okay, he didn't really change anything. Sak the Gemara. So that was Rabbi Eliezer's last question on Rabbi Yeshua. So the Gemara, like Kamalei Hakish, Mamina Nachas Rabbi Eliezer, the time of the Rabbi Yeshua. Vice that Rabbi Eliezer did not respond to this. He didn't continue arguing. So at this point, Rabbi Eliezer finally understood the proper understanding of Rabbi Yeshua. That means we had said right at the beginning that Rabbi Yeshua's reason was really because he says it gets converted into a chatas. It's not a din that because the lishma changes it. So at this point, Rabbi Eliezer understood that this is the reason of Rabbi Yeshua, that because it got changed into a chatas for purposes of Me'ilah, so therefore there's no point in continuing to follow this whole line of reasoning. Dam Rabbi Adav Rabbi Rahava, Amar Hayu Rabbi Yeshua, Oylo Oysa Sha'atzu Lamata Kamaisa Chatas Shem Chatas, Kiven Shemalik Bas Simin Echad. Once you do one simin, meaning Kamaisa Chatas, Nimshechas and Nazis Chatas Oif, it gets pulled over to become a chatas oif, which is really what Rabbi Yeshua's reasoning was from the beginning. And therefore, all these different kashas from Shlomim, we're going to ask later on that why don't we have the same din by other things? But that was never what Rabbi Eliezer was asking. Rabbi Eliezer was asking legabi the lishma. Zak Gemara, ihachi. But Gemara asks the obvious question. Okay, so we understand that this is only applicable, that something should be converted by an oif. So therefore, all these questions from Shlamim, from Asham, are not relevant. But why don't you have the opposite, where you did a chatas oif, nami she'asala ma'ila k'ma'asa oila, michir ma'ala b'asimenecha timshechet havi yoilas oif. Let's say that the chatas oif should be able to come, so there should be two exceptions that Rabbi Yeshua argues about. Not just the oilas oif that was converted into a chatas, but also a chatas oif that converted into an oila. And if you'll say, Ein Chanami, Rabbi Yeshua would also say that. Rabbi Yechon Shem Reb Bana, Kacha Yahatza Shal Mishnah. My love, Kacha Yahatza V'su Loi. L'chayra, that Rabbi Yeshua is only saying it in this is the Hatzah of the Mishnah, this is the outcome, I think, of the Mishnah. That this is the only case where Rabbi Yeshua argues and not anymore. Loi kach Hatzah shel kula Mishnah. Where it says no. That it could be, he says no, it could be that it's Ein Chanami. Rabbi Yeshua, even though he said it only legabi the case of Oilas Oif that became a Chatas, he would also agree to do it for a Chatas that became an Oila. That's the way he understood it. That's what Rabbi Adav. Rashi Yamar, Rashi disagrees. Rashi says no, it can't. Rabbi Yeshua would only argue in the case of a Oila becoming a Chatas, but a Chatas becoming an Oila, we disagree. Bishlam Oilas Oif she'asur lamata k'maisa Chatas shem Chatas. Even the ha'hech sheira b'simin echad, v'ha'hech sheira b'shnei simanim. Since a oila you have to do two simanim, and a chatas you only do one simanim. V'oilas oif lamata lesa, and also you only do oilas oif lamaila. Even the malik ba simin echad, since he did malika lamata, right? He's doing it b'makam of a chatas, and he's doing it k'maisa chatas. So once he did this, the first siman echad, nimshechas v'nasas chatas oif, it becomes a chatas oif. So let's see the Rashi for this, because Rashi explains what the reasoning is. Rashi Yama, l'oilam loy palid, v'loy tikshi. Rabbi Yeshua is not going to be chaylik on the case of a oila of a chatas becoming an oila. The bishlam oilas oif she'asal amata. Even the chatas hechsher b'siman echad, since a chatas becomes it becomes kosher, it becomes a valid avodas chatas with a single siman. V'gama v'gumar avodas, and memar lahashlam, and you finish that first avodah of the malika quickly. Koydem sheyachal al zeh shem oila psula. You have that you did a ma'isa chatas by doing the malika before you have that malika being an invalid oila malika, because the oila malika is only concluded when you do two simanim. So it hasn't concluded to be a invalid oila malika by the time you already became a valid chatas malika. V'zui hechshera b'shnei simanim. U'lefikach siman rishon ein poisel ba mishum asiyas mata. That which he did at lamata is not going to passel it. It's not yet a passel oila because of what he's done so far. But it did become a viable chatas because he already did the malika of that's necessary for chatas with that siman. and Chal Hashem Psul Oila. Chal Hashem Chatas Ksheira. Hilk on the Meshach V'Yetzer B'Shem Elav V'Nasel Chatas. He's doing this all L'Shem Chatas, and he did a valid Maisa Chatas already because you only needed one simon. So that one simon was done as a Chatas before you had a Pasala Maisa Oila that was done L'Shem Chatas. Okay, so I lost my place. So Rashi Amar, come get stuff from the Bishlama Oilus Oiv Shasal Lamata Kamaisa Chad Shem Chad Skim the Hach Share Besimenecha. Vakshe B'Shnei Samarim, Oilus Lamata Lesser, Kiva Simenecha, Nimshech V'Nasas Chatas Oiv, like we just said. El Chatas Oiv, but a Chatas Oiv, Kim the Amar Mar, Malika B'Chol Makam Shera. The Chatas Oiv, you can do Malika in any place. Michi Malik Basimenecha. As soon as he did one Simen Lamaila, Ifsala, it's already became a pasal achatas before it had a chance to become a kosher oila malika. Kihada malik beidach simon, when he does the second simon to complete the avodas hadam, the malika, as a valid oila, heichim mimshcha v'havi oilas oif. It does. It's lost its ability to switch and become oilas oif. Okay. Gufa. Gufa, Amar Rad Brahava, Oimar Harib Yeshua, Elis Oif Sha'asal Amat, Kamais Chatas Shem Chatas. Kishabot Semenechad, Meshech Zanasas Chatas Oif. This is okay. This is really gonna be the next Amid. We'll see this hopefully tonight to get to the Mishnah. This is a difficult. The next Amid is till the Mishnah, really Amid and a half. The Mishnah is very complicated. So I hope that I'll be able to get to it tonight. If the ilm is